Australia's unemployment rate fell to 4.4% in May. The economy added 40,300 jobs over the month, and the participation rate, which is a measure of how many people are working or looking for work, it held steady at 66.7%. This data follows a weaker than expected result in April, when we saw employment falling by 18,600 and the jobless rate rising to 4.5%. It also comes a day after inflation figures showed that price pressures were easing faster than expected, at least at that headline level. So recapping there in terms of what we've seen in the month of May, the unemployment rate has fallen to 4.4%, and this was in line with expectations from economists. Joining us now is Callam Pickering, a senior economist at Indeed. Callam, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on the program.
We know that these monthly numbers are notoriously volatile, but just on the face of it, what can we read from them?
Well, they certainly are volatile, and they have been volatile throughout the course of 2026. But at first glance, it does appear as though this is a pretty good jobs report. You look at the employment figures up 40,000, that's a really good result. Of course, it does come after a quite weak result back in April, but still it's a rebound. It indicates that there's still some strength in the Australian job market. And the unemployment rate dropping, easing slightly to 4.4% is another good result. It is much higher than we were at the beginning of the year, but a 4.4% unemployment rate is still really good given some of the economic challenges that we have faced over the past year or so.
Does this tell us that basically when we think about the jobs market, that fundamentally it is still pretty strong despite the 3 interest rate hikes that we've seen already this year? And also, how do we then read April? Do you see it more as a blip? Because certainly some economists say that because of the Easter holidays, that did have an impact on those numbers.
Yeah, certainly I would characterise the Australian job market right now as still being really tight. Not as tight as it was, say, 12 months ago, but still really tight by historical standards. This is a job market where there's still a lot of jobs being created, a lot of jobs waiting to be filled. Skill shortages are still quite common. So this is still a really good job market if you're out there looking for work. In terms of how we interpret the data, well, the volatility does make it difficult. And April was certainly a very weak result. It's always a little bit, you always want to avoid drawing too much attention to a single monthly outcome. And this month's results sort of highlight that, right? The jump to a 4.5% unemployment rate was a little bit of a surprise. We've taken a step back to 4.4%. But at the same time, maybe this month is the aberration, not last month. And so you sort of need to look at things over the course of a few months to get a really good sense of what labour market conditions look like. Now, the good news for, say, the Reserve Bank of Australia, they get another labour market report before their next meeting in August, right? And that will give us a better sense of exactly where the job market sits right now.
Speaking of the Reserve Bank, taking also what we saw in terms of the inflation numbers yesterday, do you see these results today changing the path at all for the RBA?
Well, certainly this year, the labour market hasn't been a big consideration for the RBA. They've been making their decision almost purely upon what has happened with inflation. Now, the data in April sort of changed that arithmetic a little bit because the result was quite poor. I think given that we are seeing a stronger labour market with the latest data, some pretty robust figures, I think in all likelihood it increases the likelihood that the RBA will hike rates when they next meet. I know that headline inflation did come down to 4%, but core inflation, the trim mean inflation, the RBA's preferred measure, has increased to 3.6% and will almost certainly increase again when next month's data comes out. So that's really high. It's certainly much higher than the RBA would be comfortable with. And I think if nothing changes when the next set of data comes out, because again, they get another inflation, another labour market report before the next meeting, then I am leaning towards them potentially hiking again when they meet in August.
In terms of the data that I know Indeed also tracks, what are you seeing in terms of employers? Are they still actively hiring? Is there any kind of a pullback?
Yeah, there's an interesting dynamic at the moment in the sense that there is a lot of jobs available. The data that we're seeing on Indeed remains really strong. What is interesting, though, is that I know anecdotally from all the businesses I talk to that hiring budgets have been cut. So there's a lot of jobs waiting to be filled. Some of them are quite critical, but there isn't the budget there to sort of go all out, advertise strongly, and things like that. Now, a consequence of that is that a lot of these jobs are going unfilled. Or they're being filled by candidates that are maybe not ideal for the jobs. So there is a bit of an unusual dynamic at play at the moment. Normally, in a market where there is a lot of jobs available, you would be talking about a pretty strong economy. Businesses would be willing to spend to find the right sort of people. That's not necessarily the case at the moment.